No politic here.
What's up, everybody? You are watching the brand new No Politic Here episode, and today we are talking about lesbians. Wait, no. Lebanon. Chris, how are you doing?
Yeah, I am good. I'm glad that you can't remember which episode of No Politic Here it is as well, and have replaced it with just the brand new episode. I thought you were about to say something had fundamentally changed about the podcast, and I was going to say, you hadn't mentioned to me. But yeah, I'm all good. I'm still here in snowy, cold Montreal, loving life, nothing to complain about. How about you? You all good, Isaac?
Yeah, man, chilling. I'm wrapping up my big Cuba video, so that's consuming all of my time. But I was very excited to research Lebanon and study this week and learn a lot of really cool things that we're going to share with the audience.
Yeah, I've been wrapping up a big Cuban too. You know how it gets for me, smoking on that pack.
Damn, that was amazing.
It was sharp. I'm a quick-witted fellow, some people say.
Really quick.
Yeah.
Very, very good joke.
Thank you. Yeah. It's not true, though. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. Just Zins. Pure Zin life.
Are Cuban cigarettes or are they cigars?
Cigars. But
You ever smoke a cigar?
Yeah, I quite like them, but I haven't had one in probably 5 years. I don't know. It's yeah, I think my grandfather used to smoke 2 a day, which is crazy. The thought of smoking these 2 fat, because it's, do you know what they are? It's like tobacco wrapped in a tobacco leaf, in my understanding.
The cigar, right?
Yeah. That's a cigar. It's just, which is insane, extra tobacco already on a huge amount of tobacco, unfiltered as well. Can't imagine that's very good for you, but they do look sick. So
no, they look. Did your gramps threw them back 2 a day?
I think so. Yeah, and a bottle of wine.
Holy shit! Was your grandfather Fidel Castro?
No,
that sounds cool as fuck.
No. Unfortunately not. The thing is I never saw him smoke that many. I just remember, I remember the smell because no one else in my family, smoked cigarettes, and I do kind of remember the smell of these cigars, and they've got quite a distinct odor because they're, so much tobacco. But I mean, I unfortunately no longer smoke, so it's a tough life.
Good for you.
It's a tough life. Yeah.
Good for you. That's good. What do you want? Zins or something now?
Yeah. I'm on the Velos. Zins are a brand. They're nicotine pouches.
Okay.
I don't know if I can show that on YouTube, so maybe you'll just have to show your reaction to that instead of the Velos. But anyway, I've got a great segue here. Me and Isaac normally cook up segues. This one's from the top of my mind. If you're loving stories like this and just small interpersonal interactions between me and Isaac, as we mentioned last week, we have now launched our Patreon, the No Politic Here Patreon, and this week's episode release, as you're watching it now, will also be accompanied by a release of a video of me and Isaac talking about Louis Theroux's recent documentary about the manosphere. And it's not from what we've discussed, it's not a major deep dive. It's just us kind of shooting the shit about a program that we both watch, what we think about it, and mixing in some personal stuff related to it, right? As two young males growing up, because I'm a big adherent, I saw all my top guys in that. I saw Myron, former federal agent. I saw Justin Waller, steel magnate. I saw HS Tiki Toki. I saw Ed Matthews, and I saw Sneeko. These 5 men together are kind of the Chomsky, the Pape, the Edward Said, the Habermas, he died recently, and I don't know, some other intellectuals, Sartre and Foucault of my life. I look up to these guys.
Sartre, Zionist.
Yeah.
Progressive except Palestine.
Who is it who wrote a book where the foreword was written by Frantz Fanon? Was it Sartre?
It was Sartre. So
Yeah.
Sartre wrote the foreword to The Wretched of the Earth, and then I believe Fanon's wife requested that it be removed due to his hypocrisy where it came to supporting Algerian nationalism, but wish-washy on Palestinian liberation.
I think her name was Josie Fanon, because I
believe so.
Because I was going to say Winnie, but I feel like that's Winnie Mandela.
It's really funny with Sartre because he kind of criticized Camus for Camus' wishy-washy stance on Algerian independence and Algerian nationalism, because Camus was a pied noir. But then he went around and he did the same thing with Palestine. So it was very hypocritical, very, very interesting of him. Sorry, I mean to...
No, you weren't cutting me off. I just thought it was like, I'm thinking about the Patreon thing. But yeah, if you guys want to support, there will also be, this week will be the first week with like a long thing of notes. There's probably about 30 pages worth of notes because I've got old summaries of books about Lebanon. And that's on the paid tier. But if you're just on the free tier, there's a link to all of the articles that we used, which, you know, you can pay for, you must not obtain illegally. Neither Isaac or myself would ever endorse that on this wonderful YouTube channel. And yeah, so if you want to see that stuff, or if you just want to support the channel and you enjoy No Politic here and you want to see us keep on doing it and make maybe even more of it and produce more content, feel free to donate. But if not, just watch and tell all of your friends about the great banter that we have on this podcast.
And Chris regularly shows his feet on Patreon. So that's what you're really paying for. Let's be real.
And there is and the names of people who, I don't know if we call them producers. I feel like that's what people do with Patrons. Well, I think people call them producers. We'll read out they're the people who produce the show, you know.
Technically, yeah, right? That is what a producer is, right? Okay.
Producers. I think it's someone who just signs up and puts their name to something and gets money from it, in my understanding. Like the voice of Hind Rajab had loads of, you know, I don't know if you've seen it,
Brad
you know, the documentary. Yeah, Brad Pitt, odd one.
Joaquin Phoenix.
My girlfriend calls it Pittaganda, that he's always like trying to wash his image and appears everywhere, because he's a pretty questionable individual. I think all of his kids hate him because he's pretty violent or something to that effect. Allegedly,
yeah. Speaking of abusive creeps, I actually wanted to talk about something really quick before we get into Lebanon, because I just saw this on Instagram before we hopped on the call. But I saw a clip of Destiny, everybody's favorite sexual deviant, saying that he blames foreign influence in the crisis in the Middle East, and what he considers to be the foreign influence that is a problem is college kids. That's what he thinks is the issue in specifically the Palestinian-Israeli dynamic. He was saying that all of these young college kids who egg on and give moral support to Hamas are pervasive foreign influence in the Middle East.
All of the losers, all the pro-Pally losers back in the day that were clapping for Hamas and were cheering on Hamas and kept saying that, oh my God, like they're freedom fighters and blah, blah, blah. They really f***ed it up. They really f***ed it up hard for everybody, because now that Hamas did their big attack, and it was bad, and it was horrible, and I think Israel did have every right to go to war with Gaza, look at what Israel has gotten. Like, it really is just the history of the whole region, is the Arabs constantly misstepping and then giving the Jews a really good reason to f*** up. It's like over and over and over and over and over again. That's just what happens over and over again. And Hamas did their October 7th attack, and what did Israel get off of that? They got to level the Gaza Strip. They get to play politic games now with the Palestinian Authority. Assad is gone. So Syria is hopefully moving in an Israeli-friendly direction. They're bombing Beirut. They got to kill Nasrallah. They got to destroy all of the Hamas leadership. Hezbollah is crippled right now. You've got Iran is on the way out now. Like, Israel got so much of that. And this is what I hate. This is why I keep saying, like, foreign interference. I've said this from as soon as I started studying this region. I feel like foreign interference is like it up so much. All those comfy losers in the West that were all cheering on Hamas, all your Hassan Pikers, all your Brooklyn anti-Semitic demonstrators that were cheering on Hamas as freedom fighters, they cheered them right into oblivion. Like, they really all their shit up hardcore. They their shit up so bad, and nobody in the West has to pay a price for that.
I had to say something to you about this because I just saw it. It was unbelievable, because we're going to talk about foreign the influence in the Middle East. We're going to talk about the empires, the imperialism, the post-colonial legacy a lot of these states have to deal with. Not fucking college kids saying, oh yeah, Palestinians have the right to resist.
Yeah, I mean, like, what? These are the words of someone who's like, he's old before his time. I don't know how old Destiny is. Maybe he's pushing 40. He's got quite an old kid. Like, his kid's like 14. So, yeah, you know, I guess you can have a kid when you're like 18, 16 or whatever. I don't know what the hell's going on over in Miami. Probably heinous shit. But yeah, I just want to say, like, do you honestly think, like, this is the main reason? Like, look at the Taliban. The Taliban are not receiving, like, plaudits from college kids you know?
Yeah.
And like the vast majority, the thing is the vast majority of like college kids who would be like sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause would probably be a bit libbed out because they don't know much about it, and they'd still be like, oh, I condemn Hamas as Hezbollah as we both do because of the laws of our country. I love the law of my country. I love the prescription of terror groups, and I think it's really, really sensical, and that I totally respect it. And
they're always right. Yeah. They're always accurate. Like when they said Cuba was a state sponsor of terrorism, that was the most accurate distinction I think the State Department has ever put forth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All of the terrorism that Cuba has done over the years, oh my, it's frightening.
Yeah. And all of the nice things like America has done to them, you know, they never did a campaign of terror against poor little Cubans. They're actually quite nice to them, so I hear.
So nice. Operation Mongoose? That was a bad joke. That was the pun on Operation Mongoose.
I think as well, it's really funny to like, kind of like, look, I've been researching Hezbollah a lot, and once again, I think there's this kind of problem of a language barrier of, I don't think there's actually that much great English language literature about Hezbollah. I actually don't think there is. And like another brick wall that I keep running into is like dog shit writing about 2006 and the way in which Hezbollah, you know, kicked the Israelis out. Like, but one thing that is clear, and like I was listening to Lebanese voices, It's really interesting because like objectively, Hezbollah is born from the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. It largely begins from like groups who target the Israeli Israeli occupation. Israel occupies Lebanon, and it pertains now to like things like the Sheba farms and stuff, and the Golan Heights, which Israel has obviously illegally annexed. But like Hezbollah are not some like Iranian puppet. And I think the funny thing is like the last few years have kind of proved the poverty of the notion that Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis are all just proxies of Iran, because Iran never joined. I mean, Iran has this bit of a different thing. Like, obviously, Iran joining straight after October the 7th would have been like a full Israeli assault on them, and maybe they weren't ready for it or something. I don't know. But like, the thing is that like, I don't think Iran would have, you know, wanted the Houthis to act in the way they did, where the Houthis blockaded the Red Sea. I don't think the Iranians told them to do that. I really don't.
Well, we spoke about this last week. It's a pretty documented phenomenon that Iran actually operates as a form of a restraining hand when it comes to Hezbollah or the Houthis or Iran-backed proxies in Iraq.
But yeah, and now it's kind of just reduced to this notion of like, I don't know. I genuinely think it's amazing. And by the way, it's kind of fucking unbelievable. Imagine if one of us, or like any larger content creator on Palestine or whatever, who was pro-Palestine, had been on a paid trip by Hezbollah, paid fully for by Hezbollah, by the way, to like just go to Lebanon and like hang out in southern Lebanon and talk to Hezbollah military figures. We would literally be decried as, we might even lose our channels, but we would be decried as like propagandists. Loaderbox and Destiny, like, look, the people they met with on that trip, the fact that Destiny recently was like, oh, I was offered a fully paid trip to Israel, even if they don't, let's say no penny was given to them, all of the shit they were doing in Palestine and Israel, I don't know, they met a lot of significant people who, you know, come on, I guess Benny Morris did know who he was, and Benny Morris might have organized some stuff for them, but still, simultaneously, what is that? Like, were they paid for that? Was the trip, who paid for the trip? Because realistically, I think Israel pays influencers all the time. I don't think the 7,000 thing is true, but they are paying influencers fucking loads of money.
Yeah, sure. I mean, even if they didn't pay them and they decided to go to the genocidal settler colony on their own dime, it doesn't really absolve them, in my opinion. But in the video that I brought up earlier, where Destiny was complaining about Western college kids and saying that they are the pervasive influence in the Middle East, he also went on to say that the history, this is a paraphrase, don't sue me, Mr. Benelli, but he went on to say that the history of the Middle East is a history of the Arabs misstepping and forcing the Jews to react. That's what he said. I believe that's close to a verbatim quote.
In the context of Lebanon, there was no, like, Arab misstep in 1982.
That's what we're going to get into, because the 1982 invasion was predicated on a false pretense. right? So it was, we'll get into it later, but
I think as well that this is the problem of like these people are obviously not leftists, and you know, me and you have spoken privately quite a lot about debate and stuff. A lot of these people learn how to debate and pretend that they're kind of like leftists rather than ever engage with literature or like left-wing thought. And look, reading books isn't everything, and there are plenty of intelligent people who don't spend their time reading, people who engage in like, I don't know, more the practice of streaming 50 hours a day. But simultaneously, like, if you're a leftist, why the fuck are you sat here advocating for an apartheid state? I'm sorry, most of them who want to purport to have, like, any regard for the Palestinians, I don't know whether Destiny does, but I do know that others, like Lonerbox will, or H3 will, they're like, yeah, Israel's an apartheid state, but, like, they only do it in the occupied territories. And by the way, just as a quick side note, I don't know if you've seen this, Israeli settlers have now been, like, weaponizing sexual assault, like, on a way larger scale in the West Bank. They've been doing really, like, grotesque and violent sexual assaults. This is, like, a new phenomenon. You know, of course they do just disgusting and heinous stuff, but recently they've started doing that. And it's really cool how, like, over the last year, you know, we've had all of this kind of weepy obsession with Jewish people's position in Western society, all in service of the state of Israel. And so Israelis can go around and do this and purport to be victims. And I think, you know what, funnily enough, the story of Israel's obsession with Lebanon is kind of something similar, where Israel portrays itself as the victim, and the reality is they are the aggressors who keep destabilizing Lebanon and won't stop fiddling in the country.
Undeniably, yeah. If you want, do you want to lay a little bit of groundwork in regards to the history of Lebanon and the ethnic composition? Because that's a pretty pivotal, important part of Lebanese history. Well,
maybe first we should speak quickly about, like, the situation currently in Lebanon.
Go for it. Perfect.
So, as I'm sure many of you are aware, if you saw us on the Do Not Worry fundraiser recently, Anthony was talking about it, the situation in Lebanon is very bad. It's kind of like almost a sideshow to what's happening in Iran. But Israel is basically in the process of launching a full-scale ground invasion, which apparently keeps coming and then hasn't sort of fully materialized. But currently what Israel is doing is they are applying kind of the Gaza... Like, I read this great quote. It's in my notes. You'll be able to find it if anyone's interested. Someone described Lebanon as the epilogue and the prologue to Gaza. So it's the prologue in the sense that the Dahiya Doctrine was kind of honed there, and it's the prologue in the sense that after Gaza, Israel has been applying its most aggressive techniques honed in Gaza, that kind of like now it has just no stop. There's no breaks to Israel. After realistically what Biden did and what Trump did, there's no breaks. There just isn't. And so right now there are hundreds of thousands of people displaced in Lebanon. I believe it's at minimum like 300, 400,000 people who've been displaced from southern Lebanon. I think that's around the number.
I heard it was more.
It might be that it's
over
a million
700,000.
It could well be. Perhaps I'm wrong about the statistics there, but there are about 150 villages in southern Lebanon, I believe, that are currently probably just going to be destroyed. And you have like, there was this striking BBC video, which BBC Channel 4, and they were in the city of Tyre. I'm not sure how you say it. Tyre. I feel like I've got it wrong because I've heard someone pronounce it very differently. But anyway, they were just like, life is still like ongoing here. There are people still here. Israel has told them to leave. Like, what the hell comes next? And it's a really serious question. Like, Israel is probably just going to mass destroy and wipe out the whole of southern Lebanon. And this is being done because, you know, Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel a couple of weeks ago. I'll actually check. So it was about 2-3 weeks ago when Hezbollah launched rockets on Israel. And I thought Anthony had got this wrong and had, like, made a mistake. No, it is true. Israel violated the ceasefire 15,000 times, apparently.
I thought it was 10,000, but yeah, that's crazy. 15.
It's 15,000. Israel. So Hezbollah was in this bind where, like, you know, there are a couple of Hebrew language articles that were talking about how Israel was actually in the process of prepping to go and invade Lebanon, but they just basically Hezbollah fired, and Israel used it as kind of like a pretext to escalate attacks on Lebanon. But during the ceasefire, they'd killed like 400 people. They'd just been bombing. They were still occupying Syria. it's this really insane scenario in which I heard on Mac DC Street, another podcast, so a Lebanese journalist describe it as they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. In the Hezbollah, she was claiming that Hezbollah had withdrawn from southern Lebanon. She's way more of an expert on Lebanon than I am, like a Lebanese speaking. I think she lives in Lebanon as well, and so perhaps she's right. And then the Lebanese army just ran out and Israel has been left to invade it. And it's troubling. It's terrifying. It's an awful situation, an awful scenario. And I think that the history of Lebanon is kind of a story of how, of this, unfortunately, like Lebanese people's lives are just consumed by consistent invasions by Israel. And they claim that it's because of Hezbollah, but let's be real here. The ultimate reason is because Israel is unable to find any meaningful solution because of what the Zionist project is with Palestinians. That's it. There's no solution to the Palestinian question.
Also, Hezbollah formed post the 82 invasion. Israel had already invaded Lebanon multiple times prior to that, notably in 48, 78. So the Hezbollah excuse falls flat, just taking into account the history there.
Well, yes, and this is kind of the problem with like people who don't bother engaging with the literature but treat this more as a topic of debate, of being like, well, Hezbollah carried out this violation, so this actually means that Israel was right to go and kill thousands of Lebanese people. Yeah. One of the fundamental things, even like a large discussion in Israeli society in 1982, is basically Israel has always premised itself on this notion that it's always fought wars of defense. And, people problematize this. And I think Ilan Pappé refers to 67 as a war of choice. Of course, 67 has never been a major focus of my interest. But anyway, the importance of 1982 is that it is like this shattering moment of the Israeli image of always having engaged in war defensively, because the justifications proffered by Ariel Sharon, then Defense Minister of Israel, are bullshit. They sell a certain operation called Little Pines, which is basically they'll go 40 kilometers into southern Lebanon, and the reason that they'll do it is because they want to get the PLO out so they can stop them fighting. I think they're called Katyusha rockets, Katyusha, I don't know, whichever one it is. Anyway, these are Soviet-made rockets that aren't really killing Israelis. It's basically that they scare the Israelis and they might occasionally kill some, but they hit their stupid settlements in the northern Galilee and the north of the country generally. And Israel just lies, and they go and unite with, they lie. And I mean, we'll talk about that. Sorry, I'm going to get into something.
Let's do each invasion point by point and fill the audience in so they can walk away from this episode with a better understanding of the Israeli-Lebanese, I don't even want to call it a conflict, Israel's many invasions of Lebanon. Yeah.
Israel's sort of mad, devouring obsession with Lebanon.
Yeah. Do you want to briefly touch on the history of Lebanon, the ethnic makeup?
Yeah, I guess we could. So, look, this isn't us trying to provide like a deep history of Lebanon. We're trying to still work out what we're really doing with the podcast, but it's more about the invasions today. But Lebanon is colonized by the French, and in 1923, it becomes a French mandate. So a mandate is just repackaged colonialism that has this really racist notion that, like, basically Arabs are political children and they're incapable of ruling themselves. And so what the colonizing power will do is they will prepare the colonized to have like a stable political system that they will be able to control at the end of the mandate. And in the context of Lebanon, the French are doing this. So the French's colonization is a little different to the British in that they force the colonized to speak their language, whereas the British don't really do that as much. So yeah, I mean, if you want a deeper in-depth analysis of this, unfortunately, that's not really what we're aiming at for this episode. But one of the things that is birthed at the end of the French colonization of Lebanon that ends in 43 is a pretty strange political system, which, I can't really get my head around, like, as how this is a real thing. It's basically this kind of like informal agreement that the power will be shared, where the Speaker of the House in Lebanon will be a Shia, the president will be a Maronite Christian, and the Prime Minister will be a Sunni Muslim. And early on, Christians kind of dominate the country. And yeah, I mean, like, this is kind of probably the first early thing, but you wanted to talk a little bit about early Israeli designs on Lebanon, right? From
Yeah,
really
for sure.
this period.
Yeah, and also another thing that's worth mentioning about Lebanon, and it kind of gets overlooked, is Lebanon's legacy of being a relative safe haven for Jewish people, especially even after 1948. The Jewish community in Lebanon increased and didn't decrease post 1948, which is contrary to the myth of uniform Jewish expulsions throughout the MENA region. And this actually disturbed the Jewish Agency, which had been trying to get Lebanese Jews to move to Israel to no avail. Lebanese Jews were in agreement with their non-Jewish neighbors that the true cause of the trouble in the region was Zionism. And when they did eventually leave Lebanon due to civil war and economic issues, a good deal of them went anywhere but Israel. All of this is pointed out in Kirsten E. Schultz's The Jews of Lebanon.
Well, an interesting point to add to that is one of the greatest Lebanese Jewish people who left, who actually became a Canadian Jewish man, is Gad Saad. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, he's fucking amazing, dude. I love him.
He is.
Yeah. I thought he was Moroccan.
No, he's Lebanese Jewish. He left Lebanon in, I think he's Jewish at least. Anyway, he left Lebanon in, I don't know, some point and came to Canada and became a whiny crybaby who is genuinely like moronic.
Yeah, he's an idiot. Suicidal empathy is his half-baked philosophy, right?
Oh, bro, I don't even know. This is just made up dog shit. This is made up dog shit for stupid people on the internet to be like, yeah, that's. I don't even know if he actually did create that kind of thinking. You know,
suicidal empathy. Gad Saad's suicidal empathy is essentially what happens when you have a pseudo-intellectual who doesn't want to contend with socioeconomic realities and material conditions, where you can explain a lot of the social phenomena that takes place pretty much all over the world if you just kind of are empathetic and understand the societal situations that birthed them. But I guess that takes a lot of work, and it's a lot easier to decry, oh, these people are naive in their empathetic worldview, and they're actually going to invite harm upon themselves by looking at the world this way. But it really just speaks to his overall intellectual laziness if he doesn't want to actually get to the crux of the conditions that form societal ills in certain instances.
It's also pretty fucking funny because probably the most empathetically led European country right now, and people might correct me who are Spanish and say it's not good enough, but still, the most empathetic country in Europe is probably handling America's crisis in Iran, America's quagmire the best. Like, they're decoupled a little bit. They still, use fossil fuels, but they've invested heavily in renewables. And
are you talking about Spain?
Means that, yeah, they're insulated. Spain is somewhat insulated from, the crisis that's engulfing and will engulf other European countries and probably the entire fucking world. But they're a very empathetic country. They actually naturalized like hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants recently. I don't know if you saw that. They just were like, yep, you can become citizens of Spain, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I saw a video of these Irish people, some like shit disturber was going around Ireland and filming and being like, are you not mad that they're importing all these Muslims and they want to build a mosque? And this Irish Chad is just like, I don't give a shit, mate. I'm not a fucking nationalist. And that was pretty much the end of the video.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just sort of this thing, like, already the Trump administration is now like talking about, permitting migrants to come back because they're a huge part of they're a huge part of the labor force. And, it's genuinely like the people who want like this issue addressed need to realize that their enemy is capitalism, and that like ultimately most people don't plan to come and colonize your country. It's just that there's only like a small amount of people who actually think like that. The vast majority of immigrants are literally here because they need to be, in terms of like building better lives for them and their children, and that existing in their own country is just not really economically viable, or perhaps not safe because of destruction or climate change and I don't
destabilization.
Exactly. And it's just like, I don't know, but it's just kind of this kind of like pathetic thing of, and I mean, well, if anyone's interested, probably one of the topics we'll talk a bit about on the Patreon, again, plugging that shit, is control. Like, it's just about control, really, in a world that's spinning ever more outside of our control, with, no feeling of accountability, no way to constrain governments just doing things that we don't fucking want. It's tough. It's tough,
I guess we can get right into Israel's long-term coveting of Lebanon? Because a lot of times when we talk about Israel's invasions of Lebanon, the clock typically starts at 1978, depending on who you're asking. But that's not entirely true, because during the 1948 war, the Israelis crossed into Lebanon and occupied part of southern Lebanon containing 14 villages up to the Litani River. Israel eventually pulled out in 1949 in accordance with an armistice agreement, but had committed so many atrocities during the occupation, like the massacres of villagers in Hula and Saliha. Israel's long-term historical coveting of southern Lebanon shouldn't be ignored. From the early years of the Zionist project, key figures like Ben-Gurion and Moshe Dayan aspired to annex southern Lebanon up to the Litani River and establish a friendly Christian Maronite state above it. Tom Segev notes this in The First Israelis, where he quotes Ben-Gurion saying, "The Muslim rule in Lebanon is artificial and easily undermined. A Christian state ought to be set up whose southern border would be the Litani River. Then we'll form an alliance with it."
Yeah, yeah, and it's I mean, today it's kind of interesting how, like, now that doesn't seem to specifically the Christian part. Israel seems to kind of abandon that, but at the same time, you know, like by forcing huge amounts of. There's this great quote that I read, which is like the race is the creation of the colonized and the colonizer having to share a space together. I don't know if it's like entirely sort of applicable here, but I think it's quite a great description of like how sharing space all of a sudden inflames pre-existing tensions. And maybe Israel actually perceives that this will fan the flames of civil war, and by creating and blaming Lebanese Shias and blaming them for like Lebanon not being prosperous, and then forcing huge amounts of Lebanese Shia refugees into parts of Beirut that then maybe lead to bombings and more bombings of rich areas. Maybe Israel is trying to stoke civil war. But yeah, these early sort of ideas are literally put into practice in 1982. The words of Dayan and, well, it's the words of Ben-Gurion there, but the words of Ben-Gurion and the thoughts of, Moshe Dayan are really like not just thoughts or like things that literally put into practice in 1982.
Yeah, well, they literally say that all they would need to do is find like a Christian Lebanese officer or even just a major or whatever, some low-level Maronite official, and then form an alliance with him, pretty much prop up him or her. They could have been super woke. Who knows? So
like moving into Israel's like kind of later invasions, because you know, Israel throughout this period then is focused on... Actually, Israel goes through this kind of period of stagnation until 1967. And one of the things that's really reinvigorated in Israel in 67 is an expansionist mindset. Like, and that's not to say it's like some advent to Zionism. Israel was premised on colonization and, the elimination of the indigenous people. But, you know, Israel kind of stagnates, and in 1967, they take huge amounts of new territory, and they kind of like linger, and the Israelis do actually build settlements under the Labour government. It's just a bit more of like a, it's not like a full-throated government support. They do support them, but it's not like what comes after with Menachem Begin. So Menachem Begin is the first Likud leader of Israel. And Menachem Begin is just like straight up, no, we deserve Judea and Samaria. He's actually the person to popularize that term. You hear all of these morons today. I remember people who kept going to me, it's actually a biblical term. And it's like, yeah, whatever, mate. This was not applied until Menachem Begin. It wasn't. This is something that you can look up. He popularized the term. But of course, most people don't bother reading books, so they just think that Israelis have always been the same way. But yeah, and you kind of see with Begin, I guess, the move back towards the maximalist territorial desires of people like David Ben-Gurion.
Of course.
Where all of a sudden they are putting into practice maybe Ben-Gurion's ideas.
You mentioned earlier that Ilan Pappé views the 1967 war as a war of choice. So did Menachem Begin. He said that Nasser's concentrations in the Sinai did not mean that Nasser was going to attack Israel, and he openly stated that the Israelis had a choice, they made their decision, and they decided to attack, Nasser and Syria.
Yeah, and I think like ultimately, when you kind of look at Likud, I don't really want to see it as that much of a change. It's more just of an innovation in Zionism, revisionist Zionism coming to the fore. It's not invented by them. I mean,
No,
Begin is literally Jabotinsky's closest living disciple.
Yeah, well, even in comparison to like the Labor Zionist Party, I always viewed Likud and like the more right-wing Zionists as more of just like the natural, logical consequence, the final evolution of an ethno-supremacist project that cannot maintain a concealed mask for long. If your project is premised on such a horrific and heinous ethno-supremacy, it's only a matter of time before that comes to the surface.
Yeah, it's kind of like this thing of, Netanyahu follows this legacy of making it so pronounced and really putting Israel's enemies to the sword and, justifying basically anything. And I mean, if you want like an example, within 1 year, Israel is participating in the invasion of Lebanon. Israel invades Lebanon in an operation literally titled Operation Litani. I think that there's 20,000 forces are sent into Israel. Hold on, let me check that. 20,000.
Yeah, 1 year after Menachem Begin takes power, right? That's what you're...
March 15th, 1978, 20,000 forces enter Lebanon in Operation Litani. And Lebanon after 75 is engulfed by a civil war. And the civil war is not entirely sectarian, because the civil war's kind of a result of community tensions, marginalizations of certain groups, uneven development in Lebanon, because Lebanon has like a pretty good standard of living. It's referred to the Switzerland of the Middle East. It's referred to as the Paris of the Middle East. It's kind of viewed as like this sort of, amazing liberal space, like, Iran before the Islamic Revolution kind of fucking meme style stuff. But yeah, it's Lebanon's doing pretty well, but things start to get tougher, and it eventually leads to a civil war. And the civil war is basically it's kind of left versus right, but it's also basically people who support the state and people who don't. So on the one hand, you've got like Christian militias and like nationalist sort of secular parties who are
You also have like
up
Syrian factions who are backing the Maronites as well.
State, yeah, Syrians come in and back the state initially and then eventually switch sides. But on the other side, you have Israel's main enemy and the kind of justifying factor of its first invasions of Lebanon, which are the Palestine Liberation Organization. After the PLO have been expelled from Jordan, they go to Lebanon, and within Lebanon, they start to threaten Israel massively because they're basically operating a state within a state. Lebanon had 16 refugee camps of Palestinians. This number is reduced because Israel's destroyed at minimum 4 of them. I don't know how many of them. I think it said it was 12 was still in existence, but I'm sure that Israel will probably try and destroy every single one. But anyway, the PLO basically gained control of these, and the PLO is showing they can do something, which is manage a state. The PLO are showing this, and Palestinian nationalism is growing in Lebanon. Not every Lebanese person likes this. There are even some of the Shias in the south, by the way. The Amal movement is one of the key Shia movements, both a political and a military movement. They don't really like this, but the Israelis don't like it the most because they know that Palestinian nationalism is doing well, and that the Palestinians are using Lebanon as a space to launch attacks on the Israelis. And Israel is upset about this because, they can't have Palestinians doing anything. And so basically, in 78, Israel launches its first operation to, as we mentioned, to crush the Palestinians. But then 1982 is the decisive moment of trying to crush Palestinian nationalism. I think the term that you see in Khalidi's work, Rashid Khalidi's work, that is, and also Seth Anziska's work, is break the backbone of Palestinian nationalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you don't mind, I can kind of lay some groundwork and fill the audience in on what exactly happened in 1982.
Fantastic. Yeah, of course.
So in 82, the Israelis invaded Lebanon under false pretenses. This is kind of a callback to what we said earlier, where we were commenting on Destiny's clip where he blames the Arabs for misstepping all over the Middle East and causing the Jews to respond. That's what he said. Those are not my words. But 82, as we mentioned earlier, is a direct rebuttal to that because Israelis, invaded under false pretenses. There was an assassination attempt on Shlomo Argov, who was the Israeli ambassador in London, on June 3rd of 1982 by the Abu Nidal organization. Now, the Abu Nidal organization was a group that had split from the PLO, was enemies with the PLO, had assassinated PLO figures, and had been at war with the PLO. But the Israelis used their attack on Shlomo Argov as a pretext to declare war on the PLO in southern Lebanon and invade the country. It's noteworthy to point out that the PLO had been strictly adhering to their year-long ceasefire with Israel at the time of the Argov assassination attempt. But none of this mattered because Israel's long-term goal was always the annexation of southern Lebanon and the installation of a Christian regime in the north. In fact, as Avi Shlaim noted in The Iron Wall, Mossad and Israeli intelligence sources suggested that the attack was orchestrated by Abu Nidal specifically to provoke an Israeli invasion of Lebanon and attack on the PLO, because remember, Abu Nidal and the PLO were enemies. This attack was also orchestrated with the suspected help of the Iraqi government, whose intentions are approximated in Chomsky's The Fateful Triangle, where he writes, the assassination may have been ordered by the Iraqi government in the expectation that Israel would attack Lebanon in reprisal, offering Iraq the opportunity to end the war with Iran in the name of unity against Israel. Israel ignored this information that the intelligence sources had gathered to justify its already drawn-up plans to invade Lebanon. To quote The Iron Wall again, Shlaim's work, the real driving force between Israel's invasion of Lebanon, however, was Ariel Sharon, whose aims were much more ambiguous and far-reaching. From his first day at the Defense Ministry, Sharon started planning the invasion of Lebanon. The IDF had prepared plans for the invasion, codenamed Operation Pines, we mentioned earlier, in two versions, a little one and a big one. Operation Little Pines called for the uprooting of the guerrillas from southern Lebanon. Operation Big Pines envisioned a thrust up to the Beirut-Damascus highway and a landing by sea to surround Beirut in a pincer movement and the possibility of another landing to link up with the Christian forces in the north. When Israeli intel officially confirmed that the Argov assassination attempt was in fact carried out by anti-PLO Abu Nidal faction, Prime Minister Menachem Begin got angry. He dismissed the distinction and said, they are all PLO. Raphael Eitan, the chief of staff of the IDF at the time, said, Abu Nidal, Abu Shmidal, we have to strike at the PLO. So they knew that the PLO did not do this assassination attempt on Argov, but they used it. During this war, tens of thousands of Lebanese and Palestinians were killed, and Israeli forces conducted siege warfare against Beirut, where they cut off food, water, electricity for about 2 months. Israel also occupied parts of Lebanon for the next 18 years, setting the conditions for...
10% of Lebanon was occupied by Israel through the SLA.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we should probably mention
Southern
that too.
Lebanese Army. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this as it goes on. But yeah, carry on. It's really interesting.
But this occupation of Lebanon also set the stage for infamous massacres such as Sabra and Shatila, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple of other things to sort of say about this. It's pretty obvious that the Americans kind of supported this because there was a factor of the Cold War as well. The PLO were portrayed as a Soviet proxy. There are quotes of American officials saying, we want the Syrians, we want the Palestinians out of Lebanon as much as you do because they are Soviet proxies. Obviously not Soviet proxies. They're not seeking to harm America. Like in the same way that I don't actually really think that we should bend to this kind of thing of Hezbollah being entirely an Iranian proxy because they don't act at the whims and the wills of the Soviet Union. They reflect a long-standing and very real set of grievances against Israelis. Sorry, say again?
Oh, because you said the Soviet Union, but you meant Iran, right? Hezbollah
Iran, yeah, right. The Soviet Union's gone, unfortunately. Yeah, it's not hanging around anymore. But no, I think it's kind of like this interesting thing, and America gives Israel the kind of the green light by saying they call it a lobotomy, right? They call it I think that's the term used. They say you can do a lobotomy, but it's meant to be a small operation. And another actually kind of important point vis-a-vis the Americans that a lot of people kind of know about, and people really focus on this one specific quote, is the Americans actually start to get pissed about this because the siege of Beirut is really, really brutal, and internationally it's kind of received pretty fucking badly. People know the famous quote of Begin being told by Reagan that he's committing a Holocaust in Lebanon. He also says another one, which is the symbol of the war is becoming a 7-month-old baby with its arms blown off. Yep. And the other significant one is that, Begin calls him and tells him like, oh, we're not weak anymore. We don't need you. And he puts the phone down, and then apparently like 10, 20 minutes later, he rings Ronald Reagan back and it's like, yeah, we need you. We'll stop. Because, and this is the thing, Ariel Sharon is a really brutal figure within Israeli history. He's a clever tactician as well.
Horrible dude.
He's a good tactician. He is. There's no two ways about it. He's an awful character, and I don't wish to sing the praises. It's like how I talk about the pager attack. The pager attack was clearly something that hit Hezbollah very hard.
It was an effective attack, moral abomination.
It is a moral abomination, and it's so funny because people balk at soldiers. There's a specific killing in the UK of a guy called Lee Rigby that's these two guys, I think it's something to do with, I can't remember if it's to do with Iraq specifically, or I can't remember. Anyway, these two guys, they kill a British soldier like in broad daylight, really brutally. And people here are like, it's a very sore point and something that was a shocking event. I remember, I think it's about in 2010. But like when it comes to this pager attack of, turning, I think Seth Anziska described it as turning, Hezbollah members into, well, allegedly all Hezbollah members into grenades, basically, in shopping malls, in wherever they were. It's actually insane. But anyway, yeah, the siege of Beirut is incredibly brutal, and it upsets the Americans. And the reason I bring it up is because, watching Israel with now what it's doing, and just like the way in which like Americans sit there, and Biden, when Nasrallah was killed, was like, Nasrallah's victims have got justice finally. And it's like, who delivered that justice? A guy wanted by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. Two guys wanted by the International Criminal Court. Yoav Gallant, or maybe Yoav Gallant was out of power, but anyway, Gallant, the ilk of those kinds who've perpetrated horrendous war crimes against people whose victims are actually undeniably far larger than those of Nasrallah.
Oh my God! Yes.
And I don't know. What do you think? Because kind of like there's this interesting thing of like, back then it feels like one of the most staunchest Republicans and one of Israel's probably strongest allies in history, Ronald Reagan, was like willing to restrain them.
I think it's interesting because not only Reagan, but also Bush Sr. There seemed like there was a period where Biden was trying to get them to reel it in, but really like nothing effective. It's interesting to see how just completely cucked Trump is, like to a degree that is unprecedented. And like Biden was, of course, ideologically a Zionist. He very much was. Trump, I don't know if he's ideologically a Zionist. I think he's like, I don't think it's working up there. I think he's just persuaded by the current Israeli government. I don't know.
Have you seen Lord of the Rings?
A long time ago. Yeah, I did like it a lot.
Do you know who Grima Wormtongue is?
No.
Grima Wormtongue is like this horrible like figure who's like poisoning. I don't know if he's like actually poisoning him or it's just through like a spell and rhetoric that's maybe done by Saruman. This is very nerdy, but I don't know that it is. But anyway, he's like controlling King Theoden, who's king of the Rohirrim, and he's just like whispering in his ear. Part of me does kind of buy into this notion that Trump is being whispered to, and not to kind of like offer any sympathy to the Americans. I believe that this is actually where problematic anti-Semitism and understanding of the American empire lies, particularly the understanding of the American empire, where America is portrayed as this good and moral country that has been poisoned by the Israelis. But I think it is pretty clear that Trump now is just shielded. I think he is a sycophant who is surrounded entirely by sycophants who tell him what he is doing is amazing. And I mean, it's ended in this insane quagmire where I actually think like Reagan was probably smarter in terms of maintaining actual American interests, because a lot of, if you read through Seth Anziska's work, Preventing Palestine, which I love, by the way, because it's like this collection of diaries and, writings from people who are involved in this time. And what he actually talks about quite heavily is like basically how Reagan was like, hey, we need to balance the interests of the Gulf states and, our Arab like friends who we want to build this new Middle East with, And like now you're just watching Trump fucking abandon them for Israel and like let Israel bomb a gas field and create this major escalation. It's insane, frankly.
Yeah. Well, using Preventing Palestine to kind of get us back on track, because I did read part of it for this episode. There's a part where he talks about the events that led up to the Sabra and Shatila massacre, which took place in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in an adjacent neighborhood in Lebanon under the Israeli occupation. So the Israeli army had control of the area and facilitated a massacre. But the events that led up to this was the assassination of Bashir Gamayel on September 14th, 1982. He was the newly elected president of Lebanon, leader of the Phalangist militia, and a close ally of Israel. He was assassinated in a massive bomb explosion. And despite there being no evidence of Palestinian involvement in the bombing, the assassin was actually a Lebanese Maronite affiliated with a pro-Syrian faction. The Phalangists sought revenge against the Palestinians and Lebanese Shias in the Sabra and Shatila camps. They conducted a massacre that would then go on to be considered by the UN as an act of genocide.
Yeah, I mean, it's heinous. It is it is a really, really awful thing. There's also a really Tom Segev described it as it belongs in the genre of Oy vey, Sabra and Shatir affected us too. Shatila, sorry. I always call it Shatir. Like
I call it Shatir too. I think it's because I read so much about like Latin America, and whenever I see like sometimes L's are like, you know.
Yeah. It's this film. It's called A Waltz with Bashir, and it's about like.
You were telling me about it.
Yeah, it's got a really interesting animation style, but it's about like basically this Israeli who has PTSD from doing Sabra and Shatir, and how all of them try and forget it, and how it actually ends with real footage of Sabra and Shatir. It's shocking, but there's also some really horrifying things that I've never seen mentioned anywhere else, which is such as things like the Phalangists used to trade body parts held in kept in formaldehyde. I've never seen anyone else say that. Maybe
horrific.
There is. I mean, I
wouldn't be surprised. Like thousands of defenseless men, women, and children were slaughtered by the right-wing Christian Lebanese militias, and Israel was in control and had access to the camps, and they controlled
the whole area.
They controlled all of the entire area, and they authorized the Phalangists to enter and facilitate. The Israelis facilitated the arrival of more Christian militias to partake in the killings because they were shooting flares in the night sky to illuminate the way to the camps. This actually ended in Ariel Sharon being found personally responsible for the massacre by the Kahan Commission, and Begin was found indirectly responsible.
It's kind of crazy, though, how the outcome is Sharon losing his job when there's a quote to Morris Draper. So Morris Draper said he didn't want the Lebanese to kill the Palestinians. He's like an American, diplomat, official. Anyway, Ariel Sharon replies to him, "So we'll kill them. They will not be left there. You are not going to save them. You are not going to save these groups of international terrorism." Sharon said, "If you don't want the Lebanese to kill them, we will kill them." Apparently, Sharon kept talking about mopping up terrorists, and there was only one bit of context that I think was important to add to this. So, Palestinian militants left Lebanon. They categorically did. They left holding their weapons. There's actually a really interesting article in Parapraxis, the name of which I can't mention. Parapraxis is, by the way, the real word for a Freudian slip. But anyway, it's like an online psychoanalytic journal. And they talk about like how when Palestinians were leaving Lebanon, they sailed down the Nile, I think it would have been. And Lebanese and Egyptian people waited, and they all clapped and saluted and like shouted at the Palestinians because they were so proud of them. But anyway, the Palestinians had left, and one of the guarantees the Americans gave is that Palestinian civilians would be protected. And look what happened. It's one of the reasons why that adds to this thing of like, Palestinians are told, lay down your arms and everything will be fine. And then when Palestinians do it, they get fucking massacred by these forces. Yeah. And it's worth noting as well, a quarter of the people massacred here were Shia as well, Shia civilians in Sabra and Shatir who lived in the camps in the adjacent areas. And so it's like this terrible situation. It does produce one absolutely insane quote from Menachem Begin, which is when it's first started, like information starts coming out and the world is outraged. Menachem Begin comments on the event saying, Goyim kill Goyim, and they blame the Jews.
That's insane. That is incredible.
Yes,
wow.
It is an absolutely insane. It is an absolutely insane quote. Yeah, it's insane because obviously, you know, it's also funny because, you know, there's another way, I believe it's in Preventing Palestine, where Sharon is like talking, and there's another massacre which is somewhat similar in Tel al-Zatar in 1976, I think, where phalangists carry out a big massacre. And Sharon's like, you trained them. You did the same things that we did. You basically allowed them to do this kind of stuff. You armed them. And now you're having a go at us and sitting there and acting morally when we do it. And he's saying this to, you know, the labor officials. And it's kind of like this thing of like, look, the people are punished. Like, it's actually odd because pretty much everyone who launched the 1982 invasion of Lebanon loses their job. Begin, Israel's prime minister, retires, resigns and becomes a recluse, and no one really sees and hears much from him for the rest of his life.
His wife died, and he had I think he had a heart attack or something, but whatever.
Quite
Fuck
possibly.
him.
I don't know. Who cares? Yeah, who cares? Fuck him. Yeah, and Sharon has to resign. Although, funny thing is I remember I was having a debate once with that opinionated girl, and she was like, Palestinians awesome. Make heroes. Palestinians, she doesn't open her mouth, which is crazy. She's like, Palestinians make heroes out of evil terrorists. And it's like, Menachem Begin Ariel Sharon was Israel's prime minister.
Yeah, he's elected after.
Yes, he's elected in 2002 or 2003.
Yeah, right after Ehud Barak. He was elected after he was deemed personally responsible for a genocide for a massacre that the UN considers a genocide, an act of genocide.
An unbelievable situation. But yeah, so the Israelis, you know, carried out this heinous attack. They aided and abetted this heinous attack on...
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, buddy, if there's a massacre going on and you're fucking elucidating the way with flares in the night sky so more psychopathic murderers can fucking find their way to the camp, you are committing a massacre.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, it's such an awful, terrifying situation. I think it's between 800 and 3,500 people are potentially killed in Sabra Shatila. It's bigger than the scale of October the 7th, by the way. And then there's no resistance. Israel tries to claim that there's clashes that broke out that led to it. There is none. Pretty much all the fighters are gone. They just enter into a camp and just round people up and mass kill them. And
they killed a bunch of kids and women. And it's not like these are fighters, not that if it happened to men strictly that would make it okay, but these are just obviously not militants. They're kids and women and elderly people. Right, and
I guess this sort of kind of marks the end of Israel's it marks the end of kind of this invasion of Lebanon.
Well, the thing that we missed, which is very important to the 1982 invasion and subsequent occupation, which lasted for 18 years, was the emergence of Hezbollah, if you want to get into that.
Yes. Hezbollah is from Hizb and Hizb, which means party. Hizb Tahrir. Yeah, Hezbollah is Hizb Tahrir is another example of a party, but Allah is. Although I don't know if you were reading older stuff. Do you notice that it's spelled Hezbollah, Hizb?
In certain,
don't know why that is.
Certain sources will call it Hezbollah. Some will call it Hezbollah.
I'm sure someone in the comments will tell us what the change was. But yeah, Hezbollah are a Shia group that emerge in southern Lebanon. Now, there are some that already existed. For example, there's one called Amal, which emerges in 1975, and whose leader was probably murdered by Gaddafi, actually, interestingly enough. So he sets off to go to Libya. And hold on, I'll tell you his name so I don't mess this up. Sadr, what's his full name? So the founder of Imam Musa al-Sadr, and he launches Amal in 1974. They're quite heavily involved in the Lebanese civil war, and they represent the Shias in Lebanon. And anyway, so people have sort of grown tired with Amal by the later 1970s. They think it's become too much of too much involved in politics, patronage, and also there are some other factors. So first of all, you have multiple Israeli invasions, and then you have the Iranian Revolution. And Iran starts to, so it happens during the Iran-Iraq War, and there's a force in Iran of like volunteers called the Sepah, and like thousands of Sepah fighters go over from like literally straight from fighting against Iraq over to Lebanon. Many of them leave, but about 1,000 stay, and they train and help to arm militants in Lebanon who are like kind of like an Islamic resistance. They just organize under the banner. And from this emerges Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is not heavily involved in the civil war. I found one source that said, nope, they're not involved at all. But one source that says, yeah, they were kind of involved. But primarily what they become focused on is liberating Lebanese territory, particularly in the south. They tap into Shias being disenfranchised. Like a major similarity with the Iranian Revolution is they frame themselves as like a party of the downtrodden, a party of the oppressed, because Shias are the poorest in southern Lebanon, in Lebanon as a whole. They are a group that feel that because they don't have like major representation or like powerful representation in the government, because they live in areas that didn't have like roads until the 1960s, which is insane to think about. They basically, Hezbollah begins, and Hezbollah becomes very good at one thing particularly, which is killing Israeli soldiers and making the occupation costly, because Israel withdraws in around 1983, and then to 1985 they withdraw to a buffer zone, a security zone,
security zone.
Yeah. It's basically just annexing territory, and it's not even very effective because Hezbollah can fire rockets over it to hit towns in the northern Galilee anyway. And so the Israelis are basically still operating in Lebanon, and they also they actually just have a straight up proxy there. It's called the Southern Lebanon Army, and they are like taught to torture by the Israelis. They run a really heinous prison in Khiam, which was actually destroyed by the Israelis. I don't know if you know this, but Khiam was a particularly important place of memory, because Khiam was liberated in 2000, and there are all these crazy videos where people like break into Khiam after the Israelis have withdrawn and the SLA collapses. And the people in it at first are like terrified. They think that like someone has come to kill them, basically. And then you see all of these things of like just these scenes of like powerful joy. And Khiam, the prison, became like a place where you could go on tours, you could learn about the occupation, you could learn about the Southern Lebanese army and what they did to people there. And the Israelis eventually destroy it because, of course, they don't want Lebanese people thinking about what the Israelis did to them. And yeah, so you kind of end up in this situation where Hezbollah emerge. They start to grow in popularity throughout, like, you know, the next 10 or so years. They are a group where they are a group that are engaged in fighting the Israelis. That's what they are. It's about removing Israeli influence from their land. They're not some Iranian puppet sent to destroy Israel. They are aligned with Iranian aims in the sense of like fighting against Israel, and also Syrian aims, because Syria view them as kind of like a pressure force to get back the Golan Heights. But yeah, so they're armed and supported by both the Syrians, the Iranians, and yeah, they are a force which is, they're intriguing because, you know, as we mentioned earlier, they're designated a terrorist organization, which I really fully just love and endorse because my government says that I have to. But yeah, they are an organization focused on resistance against Israeli occupation of Lebanese land. They're not like, I think that this is something that we have to reiterate over and over again. They are not like just mad Islamists. Like, it's really insane to portray them as that, as a group motivated by harming Jewish people, by hating the West, or whatever the hell people want you to believe. They are an organization that is motivated by Israeli occupation of their land.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the case as well with Hamas. Speaking just strictly from an academic standpoint, there are historians and scholars who will analyze the motives of Hamas and say, primarily, first and foremost, these guys are concerned with national liberation, resistance. There's an Islamist dimension to what they believe, but is that really the primary motivating force, or is it national liberation?
Yeah, it's more of like a contention within the Palestinian national movement and the perceived failure of the secular. It's actually as well how one of the reasons that Islamists, kind of like Hezbollah as an Islamist party, emerge is because people are kind of tied with like the secular leftist groups that were previously supported by Shias that weren't like, kind of, you can see it wasn't necessarily always sectarian. and they view them as kind of having abandoned the South. And so what emerges? A militant organization that are heavily focused on protecting the South.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the guerrilla war that they waged against the invading Israeli forces was quite impressive. Like, I believe in Israel they refer to it as their little Vietnam, right?
They refer to 82 as Vietnam as well, because the reason it's also referred. Sorry. But the reason that 82 becomes like Vietnam is because it's this further thing. Yeah, it is kind of like this Vietnam. Israel's invasion of Lebanon is not popular, and Sabra and Shatila is not popular. There's a huge protest in Israel about Sabra and Shatila, actually, one of the biggest in Israeli history. But once again, I kind of I don't know if my opinion of just Israeli society is coloured by the here and now, but part of me just thinks it was like ire about being lied to about the war and Israelis dying, Israeli soldiers dying, as opposed to like actually like a deep care about what Israel had done to Lebanese civilians, much like, you know, the hostage protest now. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, it's kind of like so like other important things about Hezbollah are Shia, and they first of all follow Khomeini, the first Ayatollah, and then actually, interestingly, Khomeini is, I don't know if you know this, Khomeini is the leader, and Ali Khamenei is the supreme leader. He's actually the first person who gets the title of supreme leader. It's added after the death of Khomeini and his replacement by Ali Khamenei, the previous leader of Lebanon, who was just Iran martyred and killed by Israel on the 28th of February, I believe. I remember that at least. But yeah, they follow.
Wait, no, that's not a leap year.
No, it's not a leap year. I was thinking it was a leap year, but it's not. It's not. But yeah, he's so they they're Shias, they follow this, but it's not like dogmatic. So interestingly, officially they follow it, but actually, if you're like a supporter of Hezbollah, you don't have to necessarily follow Khamenei as like the main leader. You know, Nasrallah is like a core, very important figure for most of for most people there. And there's also another person called, Syed Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah, who is seen as like the spiritual leader of Hezbollah. He's like he's a source of emulation, the Shias say, Shia Muslims say, like someone to follow, someone to listen to. And yeah, it's I don't know, like it's really hard to see Hezbollah as this evil militant Islamist group and pretend that they are motivated by just a desire to kill. Like,
yeah,
I can't see it, you know.
I mean, I saw a post a few days ago, very simple, very reductive, but intuitively it made sense. It went along the lines of Hezbollah emerged because Israel invaded Lebanon and refused to leave. Hamas emerged because Israel invaded Palestine and refused to leave. So, I mean, a brutal invasion and occupation is going to breed resistance. And I mean, during Israel's occupation of Lebanon, it engaged in horrific atrocities, multiple punitive bombing campaigns designed to pressure the Lebanese government into doing something about Hezbollah. There was Operation Accountability in 1993, which saw Israel intentionally drive 500,000 refugees towards Beirut. It was Operation Grapes of Wrath in 1996, which saw Israel heavily bombard the south and force 200,000 to flee. This campaign is also infamous for the Kfar Khana massacre, where Israel shelled a UN base housing refugees and killed over 100 civilians. So, I mean, there's all this bloodshed that Israel causes all over the region. And it's you know, when you look at what happened on October 7th, and there's always that quip that you're greeted with where it's like, well, what was Israel supposed to do after this massacre, after this October 7th attack? But I mean, what were the people who experienced Kfar Khana or Sabra and Shatila or the various invasions of Lebanon supposed to do after their assault, after they were on the receiving end of Israeli aggression and murder and violence? It's just like there's a completely separate set of standards applied to the Israelis versus the Lebanese or the Palestinians or just Arabs in general.
Living without a semblance of justice, like no way when Netanyahu dies is the American president going to be like, this is if he was killed by Iran, right? Like if he had been, I mean, have you seen the discourse about him having 6 fingers and it all being AI?
Yeah, he's drinking his little cup. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just not kind of like crackpotted out enough to just buy that. Like, I don't know, like maybe some of the stuff looked funny, but still simultaneously, I think if he was dead, like he's not actually that important enough to the Israelis to be like this figure. Like anyone replaces him.
People were pointing out how in that video, the liquid in his coffee cup should have spilt over, and they had like a frame of, I guess, the liquid looking like it was physically inclined to pour over. But I was a barista for 7 years, so I know that shit can get fucking real wavy before it actually spills over. So I don't buy it.
Well, because it's also just like thinking about it. That's not even liquid, right? It's like a froth on the top of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah.
But I think it's like really important to contextualize like that of like saying, when Nasrallah is killed, Biden's tweeting out like, this is a moment of justice for all of the victims. And it's like, bro, pretty much every Israeli politician, every leader of every chief of staff, every Minister of Defense, every Minister of Police, every Israeli politician pretty much that there is. When they die, will we get tweets about how it's a semblance of justice? There's a great article and it's called like, Will the Sword Always Devour by Ann Ziska in Jewish Currents. And I think it's like a quote from some biblical story. And it's like about a fight and he's like, will the sword always devour? And in the context of Israel, he just talks about like how Israelis, like roamed around celebrating Nasrallah, how like club goers are like dancing like Nasrallah's dead, and how Israeli news, they're like popping champagne. And it's like, you guys are just addicted to this. And I see it in like the people who, I remember I tweeted something out the other day and someone was like, your Islamist friend Khamenei is dead. How's that working out for you? And it's like, I don't like, I can see people criticizing them. My life has not been defined by Israeli invasions. My life has not been defined by Western interference in my country. And I think like, ultimately, I don't sit here and I don't cry over the death of Khamenei. I don't. But I am also not stupid. And I also understand that, there was this tweet by Richard Hanier that was like on the first day. And he was like, I think that actually killing bad people is good. And what's going to happen if you kill bad people and it works? And it's like, hang on a second. No. I mean, how stupid are you? Like, all of us could have foreseen that, probably Iran was expecting Khamenei to be killed. And it's very clear that things have maintained and the situation, like the global economy is fucked. And, like I was sat here thinking earlier, like, I come to Canada, my girlfriend comes to the UK. Jet fuel's going to be up in price. Is that going to be like easier thing to do? Right. I think airlines are going to be pretty fucked. I think by all of this, and it's like such a minute because my life's not being destroyed, and it's such a like a woe is me problem. I'm not sitting here and trying to make people feel sympathetic for me. There are people's countries being torn apart by Israel, but it's just like how like these people are so stupid and so addicted to just killing and thinking that does something. Yeah. Nasrallah replaced someone who was assassinated.
Yeah, honestly, I think that us in the global north deserve to have a little bit of economic fucking hardship right now. I think the fact that we have let this go on for how many years, Israel being a repulsive force in the region, killing, invading, occupying, committing genocide, and nobody has stopped them.
What justification is there for like killing Khamenei, and the person who does it is wanted by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice? What semblance of justice is that?
It's incredible. It's insane.
I guess it's part of this kind of thing as well of like looking at a figure like Churchill in Britain. People aren't able to see like the warts of Churchill because Churchill was a really bad character.
Horrible guy.
And it's actually funny. I was thinking about this recently, how most of his worshippers like worship America and Israel now. Churchill, Hitler and Lenin were all like quite scared by the First World War and the growing ascendancy of America and global dominance of America. I was thinking about this, and I don't know enough about Churchill's later life to kind of understand his perspective on, American dominance, but all of them wrote about this fear. And I look at this world in which is in front of us, and, reading this history is particularly interesting because you kind of see like, Reagan was fucked, Reagan was awful. Reagan also, there were times where they admitted, the settlements are the main obstacle to peace. They were at points restrained Israel because they knew that their Arab allies also mattered. And now I'm watching, you know, Israel and America bombard Iran and like Israel be protected when it offers basically fuck all, like it does in comparison to the global economy of like, you know, what the Gulf states offer. And I'm not saying it's like, oh, you know, I'm really incredibly sympathetic about countries that have aided and abetted genocide, who've committed heinous atrocities in Yemen, you know. Sudan, Yemen, Egypt stealing democracy from the country and implanting a brutal authoritarian dictator who's one of our closest allies. I don't feel major sympathy for those governments, but like, yeah, it's kind of just so like the point we're at is insane. Like, put frankly, it is insane, and it's an acceleration from like even how bad Ronald Reagan was. You know, the guy who did Iran-Contra. The guy who was back death squads in Nicaragua,
El Salvador, all over Central America. Yeah.
And I don't know. I think Lebanon is such a like interesting story of like what this all is. Like, I mean, we should probably like get back to it a bit, but I think it's like interesting to talk like this because after what really kills the Israeli occupation, going back to, you know, we were just talking about Operation Accountability, Grapes of Wrath, is in the IOF was basically losing on average about 25 soldiers a year, which is Israelis got really upset about because there's like 5 people who live in Israel, you know, relative to the rest of the Middle East. It's actually this stupid tiny country that's made it, you know, a stupid settler colony that really has just wrought death and destruction to protect it. But in February of 1997, the death toll goes over 100. So there's a big major incident that I don't think really involves Hezbollah, but there are 73 soldiers killed when 2 helicopters collide. I don't know how that kills. Were there 73 people on these helicopters? I don't know, but they collide and huge amounts of Israelis die. But then there's a brush fire during a skirmish where 5 Israeli troops are killed. And then on the 5th of September, there is this major catastrophe for Netanyahu, where Israeli commandos are killed at Insaria, which is just north of Tyre, where 12 are killed. And they are killed actually by their own explosives after their, you know, there's like a skirmish occurs. And all in all, 39 Israeli troops are killed by Hezbollah and its allies that year. And it's like the real turning point. And there's like a movement that grows in Israel called the Movement for the Peaceful Withdrawal from Lebanon. And it includes like the Four Mothers movement, which if I remember correctly is like, you know, mothers who are upset about their, you know, their poor son being killed whilst he was occupying other people's land. No reflection on what their country is, just like, I'm sad my son was killed. But eventually, under Barak, Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah score this humongous victory. Like it is categorically massive. It is this moment at which Lebanese land occupied for 18 years, the Israelis leave. The Israelis, through force and militancy, go. And it proves Hezbollah's point. It proves the point of many of these militant resistance factions that peaceful diplomacy is not leading to withdrawals. Militancy is. Like, you know, and people might say, well, Sharon withdrew from Gaza, but Sharon actually did want to withdraw from Lebanon as well. He didn't really back the continued occupation because he viewed the costs as just too much and preferred probably the style of Gaza, which is like, you know, highly militarized, like bombings of they didn't. By the way,
he pulled out of Gaza and just situated right on the border, and even his team was saying, we did this so that we could, you know, strengthen our control over the West Bank, and this was a strategic thing. It was actually, there's a direct quote from someone on his team who said the reason, the rationale of the Gaza pullout was to freeze the peace process.
In formaldehyde.
Yeah, I can't remember that, but
I think it's either freeze the peace process or put the peace process in formaldehyde or freeze the peace process in formaldehyde. You know what formaldehyde is?
Yeah. I drink it.
Okay. Really?
Yeah, it's great.
Wow,
big fan.
My guy.
That's how I get ready for the episodes.
But it's kind of like this situation that like Israel is like, right, we don't need to occupy. It's not right. And by the way, there's another moment where in 1999 a roadside bomb kills the most senior Israeli officials serving in the security zone, Brigadier General Erez Gerstein, along with a well-known radio reporter, Ilan Roy, and 2 other Israeli soldiers. And the reason that's significant is because this basically collapses the SLA, because Gerstein is the key liaison with the SLA, and this is just a huge victory for Hezbollah. And the SLA basically collapses. It's long been infiltrated by Hezbollah, and the organization is just pointless at this point. And it's like actually in June 1999, just prior to Netanyahu leaving office, Israel does its favorite thing, and they really blame the Lebanese government of Salim al-Hus for Hezbollah's actions. And guess what they do? They blow up bridges, roads, infrastructure, and electric power. They just carry out a mass bombardment campaign, as they're doing right now. It's like Israel's fucking favorite thing.
Yeah, they throw a tantrum and just fucking start dropping bombs. But I mean, 1982, it's a failure. It was a complete failure. It gave Hezbollah a lot of prestige and legitimacy because they were seen as figures that liberated the South, because they did liberate the South, just categorically, that is true. There are also some Lebanese people, and I've spoken to some just in my personal life as well, who believe that, you hear this phrase when you talk to some Lebanese people, they say that Hezbollah has hijacked the state on the behalf of Iran. But as we've been over, like, it's not entirely fair to say that Hezbollah is just an arm of Iran when Iran has actually had to restrain them in the past. It's not really borne out in the data or the historical record, but I'm not here to, police the way a Lebanese person thinks about their own country. It is what it is. But after the pullout in 2000, after Hezbollah liberated the South in 2000, it was just 6 years later when Israel invaded again. And that would be the Second Lebanon War of 2006. Yeah. So just to lay a little bit of groundwork, in response to the intense Israeli, American, and European siege of the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah fighters in 2006, July 12th, killed a couple of IDF terrorists and captured 2 or 3 more that they claimed were on Lebanese territory. Now, whether or not that is accurate is debated, and depending on the source you read, the specifics vary, but ultimately it's irrelevant because what followed was a horrifically disproportionate 34-day offensive by Israel. So immediately, it's worth noting, immediately after the abduction, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah put out a statement saying he did not want war or escalation in the South. But Israel ignored the diplomatic route, and like we said earlier, whenever they get mad or have their back against the ropes, they resort to bloodshed and just violence, mass violence.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty. There's also one thing which is funny, because if anyone reads my notes, you'll see this thing of like where I'm like, I start reading a source and I'm just like, I'm not reading this because it's crap, because it's like Hezbollah carried out a capture of 2 Israeli soldiers. They did this, just decontextualized from why they did it. So the other factor is there are still some Lebanese prisoners who've been detained without due process and against the rulings of the Israeli Supreme Court. And so Hezbollah basically says, we're going to free the last of the Lebanese prisoners held inside Israel through this. And, whatever they've done, they have been held without due process and against the rulings of the Israeli Supreme Court. And so Hezbollah basically captures these Israeli soldiers in part for that as well. But you're right, like, Israel doesn't go through any diplomatic means to get these hostages back. It's literally just like, right, we're going to go on a bombing campaign. We're going to massively bombard southern Lebanon. We're going to cause major issues. But even then, Israel meets a really, really bad defeat, which is Hezbollah rides high off some incredible legitimizing moments at these points, such 2000 and 2006. I think over 100 Israeli soldiers are killed in this. There's a place called the Graveyard of Tanks as well, where a huge amount of Israeli Merkavas are hit through Hezbollah's, anti-tank guided missiles, which right now they're using again. Probably better ones now. But it's a really bad beating back for Israel, basically.
Yeah, I was just reading The Israel Lobby by John Mearsheimer, and he actually has a little passage about how Hezbollah's popularity and prestige was enhanced post 2006 when they were able to quell the Israeli attack. He goes, history repeated itself in 2006 in the wake of Israel's punishment campaign. Hezbollah's popularity surged in Lebanon and across the Arab and Islamic world, and most Lebanese vented their rage at Israel and the United States rather than Hezbollah or the government in Beirut. It's also probably worth mentioning that the 2006 assault on Lebanon is where the Dahiya Doctrine is really honed, right?
Yeah, the southern suburbs of Beirut, Dahiya, which is seen as like a Hezbollah area. But like, it's kind of like, I was thinking about this with Gaza. It's like how they talk about like Hezbollah infrastructure. Hezbollah runs a school for like Down syndrome kids. Hezbollah runs like cheap clinics where you can go and get healthcare, like cheap low-cost hospitals. They predominantly serve Shias, but they also serve basically anyone who's in said area. And like, you kind of look at this stuff and it's like, this is what you call infrastructure? And when people are like, these were Hezbollah doctors, it's like, what do you mean, right? Are they on the payroll of Hezbollah? Hezbollah, like, basically gives patronage to Lebanese people. The Lebanese, like, another legitimizing factor is after the Israeli bombardment, thousands of homes are damaged. I think it's like maybe 15 to 20,000. Hold on, I'll double check that. But anyway, all of these homes are damaged, and the Hezbollah are able to give money to people. Hezbollah are able to basically help people rebuild their homes when the government aren't. And so it's kind of like this thing of like, it's kind of like these things of like the Hezbollah can do it and they can gain legitimacy from it.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning that the Dahiya Doctrine, for those who don't know, and this is actually kind of mind-blowing because it just doesn't even seem like a real thing, but the whole point of the Dahiya Doctrine is to inflict as much suffering on civilians and civilian infrastructure as possible, as to pressure Hezbollah into surrendering. So the whole point is to create a situation where Hezbollah feels pressured to surrender because Israel is deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. This is unheard of. This is insane.
It's also about like breaking the support base of Hezbollah, and they've tried it in Gaza, and it didn't work in Gaza. Like, the things that they honed in Gaza were basically just like starving people, and I don't know if you've seen this because it's kind of falling away to the wayside in all of the news that's going on. Loads of footage keeps being released of like just Israeli soldiers shooting from like Merkava tanks and people at the GHF sites. I don't know if you've seen this. There's like been this steady flow of footage coming out of it. Yeah, it's kind of like a minor story. It's not minor. It's, this is like just straight up. I mean, we all knew this was happening. Israelis just massacred huge amounts of people through a food site organized with the Americans.
The Gaza Humanitarian Fund, are you talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking it's unhinged. It's an unhinged thing to do. I was sorry if I wasn't really listening when you said that. I was digging into like an old script of mine where I covered the Dahiya Doctrine, and there's a quote from a colonel named Gabi Saboni who openly stated that the goal of the Dahiya Doctrine is to, quote, target economic interests and the centers of civilian power that support the organization Israel is fighting. In this case, it was Hezbollah.
Right.
So it's just out in the open. He's like, yeah, we're fucking up civilian centers.
What is that but terrorism? Like, genuinely,
exactly.
What do you call that? Like,
yeah.
The Israelis get beaten on the ground, and so they do all that they can ever do. Like, realistically, they fought Hamas for what? Nearly 2 years? Over 2 years, actually. And they killed significant figures in Hamas. They degraded its capabilities, but they did not fulfill their war aim. They didn't. They categorically didn't. Hamas is still in power, and seemingly thus far, they haven't been allowed to carry out their mass ethnic cleansing campaign.
Yeah. And more importantly, the desire for Palestinian liberation is, if anything, strengthened. And now it's a plight that is understood and felt throughout the world. There are people who, prior to October 7th, probably didn't know anything about it or weren't really too aware, but now are like diehard supporters of the plight. So, I mean,
Israel's Sinwaristas.
That's hard, dude. That's a hard name. Holy fuck.
Yeah.
That made like Chavista sound way cooler.
Yeah. The Sinwaristas. But no, like, I totally agree with you, because it's kind of this funny thing of like, earlier you said 1982 failed. And the only part of Israel's aim that they achieved right was they got rid of the PLO. And the reason that they were doing that was because Gemayel was seen as this strong one. By the way, we didn't mention this earlier. Really interesting anecdote about Gemayel, Bashir Gemayel. Bashir Gemayel's father, Pierre Gemayel, was inspired by the Nazis. This is categorically true. Gemayel went to the 1936 Olympics and really admired the discipline of the Germans and thought that it was kind of cool, and he imported that back to Lebanon and kind of set up the Phalange through that. Obviously they weren't like a Hitlerian specifically in all of their ideology, but they were intriguing. And the loss of Bashir Gemayel, by the way, is really significant because he united all of the Christian militias into something called the Lebanese Forces in 1980. But yeah,
they were inspired heavily by Franco's Spain as well, right? If I'm not mistaken, there was a movement in Spain called the Phalangists. I don't know if that's where they got their name. Yeah, the original Phalangist movement known as Phalangism. It was like a far-right movement in Spain.
Yeah. What I was kind of like getting to is like Israel didn't get that. They didn't get the, allied, sympathetic, Christian-dominated Lebanese political system. And they birthed Hezbollah. They achieved the aim of, getting rid of the Palestinian Liberation Organization from Lebanon, but then, who they portrayed as these evil, monstrous terrorists. And then all these short years later, they ended up in a situation where they were negotiating with the PLO. They ended up with fiercer Palestinian resistance through the First Intifada that they were unable to control. They failed. And I think that this is kind of the thing of like, as well, and Ziska talks about in the Sorbal Devour, Israelis and, their backers and supporters on the internet and stuff are intoxicated by these mass killings. What they're not seeing is the long term. And I think people have too much of an investment in this notion that authoritarianism and brutal violence will work forever. I don't think it will. I don't. I think right now, serious questions about the Middle East are being asked about Iran, pertaining to the military bases, pertaining to Western relationships with America, that America will just abandon them in favor of Israel, that it will bomb a gas plant, knowing Iran has already not directly struck them, but, debris keeps hitting these things and causing major fires. Apparently it's just debris, although maybe they have hit them and, it's being hidden from people. But I think there's kind of like this thing of just, they've been abandoned for what? And I think it really asks fundamental questions. And where the future goes, I don't know where we'll know. And through Gaza, where Israel may have degraded Hamas to the point where it can't launch a cross-border operation for, the long-term foreseeable future, they have created a world that will never be the same again, where Israeli leaders are wanted by the International Criminal Court, where eyes are not off them. And
Israel... The image of Israel will never bounce back. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything they could do to get it to bounce back. And it shouldn't. They committed a genocide, and they have been committing ethnic cleansing and genocide since the inception of the project. So it's unfortunate that it took this long. And there is no silver lining in a genocide, so I'm not framing it as though this is, the fruits of something horrible. It's just a description of the reality. Is the world is now aware of what Israel does. And like you said, the future for the Middle East is going to have to change. Like, America presented itself as a paper tiger. It put its allies in the region in harm's way. They had military bases all around the Middle East, which ended up being a liability to the countries that were hosting it. There's a famous Mao quote from back in the day, and I believe he's talking about the military base that America set up in Lebanon. And he goes and he says, all of these U.S. military bases throughout the world are going to be a noose on the neck of American imperialism. And I mean, as we've seen just in the past few weeks, they have been a liability in the region. And I don't give a fuck about these allies. I'm going to be completely honest. Do I give a shit about the UAE when they're committing genocide in Sudan? I don't give a fuck. But it is important to look at the situation and say, wow, America implicated all of these countries that thought they were on the same page, thought that America would stick up for them, and they didn't. They failed. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Trump is asking NATO members to come help him open it up. Nobody's answering his call. He looks like a tool.
Yes. I mean, all that made me think of is l'impérialisme dicté par toute sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bombe est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. The French translation of imperialism dictates all. The revolution is not a dinner party. The A-bomb is a tiger on paper. And the masses are the real heroes. From Mao Mao by Claude Chenet for the Jean-Luc Godard film. I don't remember the name of it. I can't remember the Jean-Luc Godard film. But anyway, it's about like Maoism. But yeah, I think like... I think looking at this situation, it's kind of crazy how many parallels there were. There's actually another good parallel. It's actually called the article I was talking about is called Must the Sword Devour Forever? And he notes a couple of things. First of all, there's this unbelievable quote from Philip C. Habib, who's the special envoy to the Middle East. And he says, "We were going to see American-made munitions being dropped from American-made aircraft over Lebanon, and civilians were going to be killed. And the US, which didn't look very good in the Middle East anyways at the time, for being so inactive, was going to take full charge of the blame. This was delivered to Reagan by Habib, apparently." Look at now. Reagan and people around him were seemingly pushing back and like, this doesn't absolve them. This isn't like, I know some people are probably like, you're giving too much credibility to Reagan. You know, Reagan did fucked up things and he presided over Sabra Shatila and what was really done to the Israelis. Like, you know, he's not as directly involved, but he bears guilt for removing the Palestinians, promising protection, and this reality ending up happening. But you kind of at least have these quotes of like someone going up to him and saying, look at what is happening. The only quotes we have, I don't know if you saw this, the Joe Kent guy who quit his job, the director of the counterterrorism center in the US. Did you see that?
Yeah.
He said that the last thing Charlie Kirk told him was, Joe, you gotta stop this war with Iran. That's the guy who's advising President Trump not to bomb them.
That guy's statement was really funny because it was just like, Trump is otherwise a great man. He's just been bamboozled by the Israelis, which, I mean, it's not really like a line of argument that I like a lot, especially when it's applied to the Iraq war, which I think is stupid. I think, if anything, I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that Israel is the tail, America is the dog. But in certain cases, like Iran, it does seem like there's credibility to the fact that the tail is wagging the dog. But as a blanket statement, like when you look at specifically Iraq, I don't think that had really much to do with Israel. It was a downstream effect to get rid of Saddam for Israel, but I do think the main motivating force was American interests, capitalist interests.
Yeah, there's just one other thing I wanted to note in particular from this article. So in 1982, Anziska says he got his hands on, from the Israeli military archives, he got his hands on this military handbook that was given out. And there are some incredible quotes in this. The terrorists position themselves among the civilian villagers, and from there they depart on their terrorist missions. As the international press started to take notice due to the huge numbers of dead, the IOF started to downplay civilian casualties. A section of the updated handbook entitled Civilian Losses said the casualties have been grossly exaggerated in the media, declaring that the IOF took every precaution to avoid harm to civilians, despite the fact that the PLO had placed headquarters, arms depots, and training bases in civilian areas. The terrorists are responsible for all civilian casualties. You kind of see this whole shit of like how
history repeats.
Lebanon is the prologue. This is kind of the prologue. The epilogue. Gaza is like, perhaps, I think one could say that Gaza is really the main story of Israeli barbarity, which is saying something, you know, with historically the Nakba and all of this stuff. It is the center stage of pure, unadulterated Zionist violence and aggression against the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine. It was a grotesque expression, but Lebanon sees many of these tactics honed, and it sees them, you know, no accountability. And now look where Israel is getting. You know, thousands were killed in the previous bombardment, the one that involved the pager operation and the killing of Nasrallah. Thousands of civilians were killed. Thousands.
Yeah.
And Israel's not held to account. They violate the ceasefire over and over again.
Yeah. I think Lebanon really lays bare the brutality of Israel, because a lot of people, and I do not subscribe to this line of thinking, but a lot of people will point to what Israel does to Palestine and they will bring up the fact that the Palestinians technically don't have a state. They technically don't have sovereignty. And for some reason in their minds, this gives Israel the right to do what they're doing, which is a horrible line of argument and not one that I subscribe to. But in the case of Lebanon, you can't even really make that. Like, all of those arguments fall flat. Lebanon is a sovereign state. Israel invades on false pretenses, knowingly, right? The Abu Nidal, Abu Shmidal quote. They knew that the PLO was not responsible for the assassination attempt on the ambassador in London, yet they used it to invade and attack the PLO. So all of those arguments that you make about, oh, well, Palestinians never had a state, blah, 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 doesn't fucking matter. Lebanon does. That doesn't stop Israel.
My other favorite thing that's like kind of that Lebanon sort of disproves when you actually read into it is, Palestinians just ruin every state near them. The Lebanese had to kick them out. The Jordanians had to kick them out. Everyone had to kick them out. They've destabilized these countries. Motherfucker, how many Palestinians were in Lebanon because you ethnically cleansed them? Why were the PLO there? What were the PLO doing? What did getting rid of the PLO do for Lebanon? Is Lebanon stable now? Is everything good and awesome in Lebanon? And, you know, did that fix everything for Israel? Ultimately, it is this thing. The Zionist project offers no solution to the Palestinian problem. Because of this, it constantly needs to be engaged in militarism and actually also internal questions about what is a Jewish state, you know, the demography of Israel, whether that be the 20% of the Palestinian population or the conflict of kind of like Middle Eastern Jews versus Ashkenazis, Orthodox versus ultra-Orthodox versus secular, and all of these bubbling issues. But one thing that always unites is the hatred of the other. The notion that Israel's promised paradise will come only when the final terrorist group is eliminated. But ultimately, these groups exist because of what Israel has done and the way in which it continues to behave. It's true. It is what Israel is and does. Yeah. And I think the only way, unfortunately, forward is for the only way forward is for some kind of equitable solution with the Palestinian people, or one state where Palestinians are given the full right of return and they have a right to decide and choose their own future, and there is huge justice for what has happened to them. But until that day, these things are inevitable. Israel will not destroy Hezbollah. It will not.
Colonization breeds resistance, and that resistance is legally permissible under international law. So, what do you want?
Yeah, when people are occupied, resistance is justified.
Yeah.
It's I don't know, and the cowardice of the international community on all of this, and our just odious desire to cling to this state. The more I think I read this somewhere. It's like a Christian guy who lived in southern Lebanon who was no supporter of Hezbollah was like, and they were like asking him questions, and he was like, I will never sit here and blame and like Hezbollah, even if I may disagree with them, even if I may not like their politics. You know, the truth is that Israel is the problem. Any atrocity, you know, people like Hezbollah did this in Syria, Hezbollah did this, and sure, Syrians can feel all the animosity in the world they want towards them as a result of backing up Assad. It's their prerogative. But simultaneously, this notion that they're the destabilizers, that they're the ones who've engaged in acts that, you know, the wonderful Israelis would never. Genuinely shut up. Like anyone who looks at this history.
The precedent of violence is set by the colonizer in every case. The FLN in Algeria, the ANC in South Africa, though the ANC in South Africa was remarkably restrained considering what they had to actually deal with. But there was still some brutal actions that they engaged in. But like I said, the precedent of violence is set by the colonizer.
Yeah, it's also, you know, it's also different in the sense of like, the South Africans never turned their full military might on just leveling townships for fun, which Israelis do in Lebanon, which Israelis do in Gaza, they do in the West Bank. They love
even
that
Desmond Tutu, even Bishop Desmond Tutu said himself that what the Palestinians are dealing with is not something that the South Africans experienced per se on that level, right? He said it was worse. Going to breed more violent resistance.
It's also amazing how like an incident like, you know, the Grapes of Wrath bombing of the UNIFIL headquarters in Ghana is just like something at the wayside. 100, I think it's actually 106 people are killed sheltering in a UNIFIL headquarters.
Civilians.
They are just killed. And that is just a point thrown to just civilian, like a huge massacre of civilians by the IOF. Just one of countless thousands of people killed, and not to mention the hundreds of thousands, millions of lives destabilized, displaced by this entity on this pursuit. And there was something I kind of wanted to mention, but it still bears mentioning now. This is mentioned, I think you've read it too, Tom Segev's the
First
7th million.
Israelis? The 7th million.
7th million. Yeah. In the 7th million, Segev talks about like this contention in Israel vis-a-vis like Menachem Begin obsesses over calling Yasser Arafat Hitler. He thinks that he's like the Nazi leader. He compares destroying the bunker of Arafat to destroying Hitler's bunker in Lebanon. But there are people in Israeli society who's like, Hitler's dead. He's not alive. This is mental. This is like an obsession. It's actually the term Judeo-Nazi, I believe, in part is birthed in context of the invasion of Lebanon. You also have like there's a protest by a guy called Shlomo Schmeltzman, who actually survived the Warsaw Ghetto and Buchenwald. And he protested both the war and specifically the use of the Holocaust to justify it. He began a hunger strike at Yad Vashem, which is the Israeli Holocaust Museum, and he actually got banned from sitting in the grounds of Yad Vashem after 7 days because he'd survived it. And he said, I don't want my personal history and legacy being used to justify this. And Begin just sits there and he goes, we are killing the Nazis. And he does this to place the Palestinian struggle outside of one of the context of, at this point, Arafat is like, yeah, I'll make a deal with the Israelis. And he constantly actually, denounces the Holocaust and all of this stuff. Arafat does this. And yet the Israelis are just like, no, we got to kill him. Hitler is roaming around there. Hitler's dead. Hitler's not alive. This is not a random desire to just kill Jewish people. It is not a fascistic politics hell-bent on the extermination of every Jewish person that, the evil Palestinian can get their hands on. Instead, this is the, a national liberation struggle. This is, designate them all terror organizations, and I'll respect that. But I will never, ever stop talking about the context in which these things exist, because if you don't, you're doing a disservice. You're existing in a world that will never serve to get rid of the alleged bloodshed and misery and poverty that you so claim to hate, because it doesn't. It's not real. All of your fantasies of just killing the next person, of just displacing and defeating the next evil, that is all they are. They are fantasies of sick minds who think that this is all just something that it can be solved through ultra-violence and militarism. It cannot. Israelis could have had a two-state solution. They could have. But now they'll never get that. They will never get that. Yeah,
and they shouldn't.
Well, thank you guys for watching what is the 16th episode of No Politic Here. I got that one right, Isaac. This is the end of this week's episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all of the comments, the likes, and the support. And once again, this, as we said at the start, this will be our first bonus episode up on Patreon. It's not going to be this is a whole, it's not going to be as academic or anything, or it's just going to be more us shooting the shit, so to speak, right, Isaac?
Yep, that's how the kids call it.
We're going to talk about what's better, IGA or the Metro, which is a better shop.
The IGA, is that a grocery store?
Yeah, in Canada. It's not in the UK.
Okay, yeah. I don't even know if they have them around where I am anymore either, the IGA.
No, they took away the IGA.
Yeah, getting rid of them.
God,
that's years.
That's a miserable note to end on. Miserable note to end on.
Rip the IGA.
But yeah,
man.
if you want to hear discussions about that, please check out our Patreon if you can support. But if not, you can check out the free tier. All the sources we've spoken about will be put in a link, and on the paid tier, our notes will be available. And the only other thing to add to that is, as well, we're going to be using the Patreon in some ways as a little sounding board of pushing out potentially what you guys might like to see, how you guys feel about the podcast, what you like, what you dislike. And so that will be done on the free tier. So if you want to come have your say over what's going on with the podcast, feel free to do so.
Yeah, we'll do some polls and just have extra content for you. Bonus episodes. We're even going to do a live stream every month, kind of like a Q&A thing. So if you guys want and you're in a position to support, that would be awesome. For our tier 2 patrons, we have decided we're going to yell or just say your names at the end of the episode and thank you for your patronage. So, Chris, if you want to start.
No Politic here is brought to you thanks to the help of Demon Lemon.
Mink Peterson, and Socialistic Discography. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
See you in the bonus episode.